doing that. And then I just wanted to share a revised slide. So, so I'm, of course, not going to go through the whole presentation again, but wanted you to see this particular one, just so you know what we're fighting with. So I redid this slide. I had mislabeled the legend. So the blue is what we observe, and the red is what was predicted based on temperature difference. And I wanted to be clear for the group, because we'll probably use this terminology again, that we're saying winter conditions when the outside is colder than inside. So I've now put that on the graph to show that everything with a positive stack effect is supposed to be winter conditions. And then when we refer to summer conditions, it's when the outside is warmer than the inside. And so it could be May, and you might think of that as closer to summer. But when we refer to summer conditions, it's actually only the part with the middle of the day when the outside is warmer than inside. And so one of the things that I wanted you to see is that you can see a nice, reasonably well predicted stack effect during the night when it's cooler outside, and then it doesn't appear during the day, and it doesn't appear when the outside is warmer than inside. And so that's one of the things that we're having to try to figure out what's going on. Okay, so that's all I have to say. Just wanted to catch everybody up on that. Any questions on that? Okay, still getting that terminology down. And then Ellison had sent a prompt about what surprised you the most in the last month. Her answer was, it's all the rain. And so I'll start with Taylor, and then Paul, and then Mason, Christian, and I'll give myself the most time to think.
For me, I think, I don't know, I always think of myself more as like work, enjoying time alone, and that I do, but I am always surprised, and was surprised this month when I was kind of with a larger group in my grad school work in Peru, that I do enjoy interaction, human interaction like that a little more than I always think I'm going to. I go in a little apprehensive, and then I'm always like, oh yeah, I like people. So that was a happy surprise that I find myself having over and over.
Yay. Hi, Ellison, we're working on your prompt here. And
thank you for fielding it. I'm really sorry I had a little scheduling snafu, but I'm here for the rest of the meeting.
You're here, so. And you're last, so Paul's next.
Okay, thanks.
Since we know what Ellison's is, that's actually a really good one. It's hard to beat, but I'm not going to just reuse that because it's easy. So I thought about what else, and I'll say what I think Mason will appreciate. And the thing, and so I don't know if it surprised me the most, but it's what came to mind, that my favorite hockey team, the Flyers, got probably the second best player in the draft with the number 7 pick. So actually somebody to, in 3 years, start to build around.
Hey, Mason, your turn.
Biggest surprise is my brother got engaged this last weekend, I would say.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so that's a big step.
That is, was it a surprise to you?
I knew for like a little bit, but just the fact that it happened is surprising. Not having to refer to him as, or her as his fiance is really weird.
Nice.
I think next. I think what has surprised me most in the last month is how smooth things have gone in the last month, to be honest. We're doing a emissions campaign as one of my other studies. This has been the first couple of weeks, and I don't think I've ever been ahead of schedule on an emissions campaign. So I am shocked, happily shocked, surprised.
Congratulations.
Yeah, we start up again on Monday. You can ask me then how it's feeling after we've given people a week off.
So I think one thing, I don't know if this has surprised me the most, but one thing that has surprised me is how hard I make things for myself sometimes. I think y'all have heard a little bit about us trying to put a hole through a house to measure pressure. And so I've been talking to various people because I don't want to mess up somebody's house, including my own, but I certainly don't want to mess up somebody else's house. Finally, I talked to a handyman and he's like, just drill a damn hole. So, and there are other examples, but I just feel like I overthink things sometimes, and then I should just do it.
Is that
Oh,
what
and
you mean?
Allison, do you want to say anything about I communicated your answer already.
Well, I appreciate you. I didn't know if I'd be able to join. I've loved hearing what has surprised people. Thanks for engaging on the prompt. What made me think of it is I've just been so pleasantly surprised by the amount of rain, because I feel like every day of rain is like a buffer against wildfires. And I think there have been other summers where it seems like the rain stopped in like May and didn't come back. So that's what has surprised me.
And it's so green. It's like living in another place.
It really is. Yeah. Now, some of you have been here longer than me. Maybe this has been normal in the past, but it strikes me as very surprising.
Okay. And then Christian, you wanted to give an update on anticipatory control today. So
Sure.
take it
I
away.
was doing this kind of high level because I thought there'd be some more of the non-technical focused people. So yeah, we'll go for it. We can add more details. Are people seeing those slides? Yeah.
Yes.
Great. I am also working on my laptop, which is unusual, so I won't see you raise your hand or anything like that if you have questions. I just want to give a quick update about kind of the mindset that myself and primarily Carson Hobson, who's the undergrad who's working with me on this, who, to be honest, has been doing much of the heavy lifting on getting some of these pieces together, where we're at in the framework that we've been using. So we've broken a lot of our efforts into these three bins. Sensing indoor conditions, so this is what's happening inside the house. Sensing outdoor conditions, which is what we're using for the anticipatory control, and then making some sort of decision point on those things to make a physical control. So a physical action based on whatever thresholds we want to put in place. And the wind just came up here, so let me know if you can't hear me because I'm outside. With a lot of kind of nuanced pieces inside of that, which we don't need to get into all of these today by any means, because we've talked about many of these before, but I want to give a kind of rapid fire where we're at on things. So this is like a completeness of the circle. So this is just the shorthand Carson and I have been using. So the measuring conditions indoors, outdoors, and sending control, we're like 90% there. We have a viable option that we could roll out today if we needed to do all of those pieces with the send controls, with the one caveat that we're sending signals, but we're not sending it to anything right now. We're turning on and off relays sitting in empty spaces not connected to things, but those signals are sending back and forth quite well at this point. We could talk to the hub. So what I'm referring to is hub is like our central node where we're doing all of our control. That's working. It's at a viable state that we could deploy it, things that we would certainly like to do better, mostly from an efficiency and scalability standpoint, but we could today go out and do all of those pieces. This is a follow-up from things we've talked about a couple of weeks ago, but sharing data with participants and capturing information from participants. We know routes to do that and we have a path forward, but we don't know what those metrics are right now. So I will follow up with kind of more social science focused people here in the coming weeks, but I think we need to start driving down to what those things that we actually want to share are and what we want to capture to make sure that the mechanisms we have put in place are looking good. And then we have covered all of our corner cases that we need to. Verifying controls. This is something that we've talked about in the past that we want to be able to know if we're actually doing what we think we are doing. We have an idea how to do that. But it's based on a lot of assumptions on how we're going to interface, again, with what I'm calling Paul's system, with the pressurization side of things. We think we have some good ways to capture that. We have minimum viable routes proven, where we can capture things like changing the pressure and air velocity and current flow going to different systems. So we think we have paths there, but we're not there yet. So what that really leaves, which I want to talk about for the rest of the time today, is the three big pieces that from Carson and my side, we haven't really shared with the group in much detail yet, which is from coding and data analysis and sensor side of things, how we are looking to see if infiltration has occurred in the home, how we're looking to see if an adverse event has occurred, and what I mean by that is an outdoor event going, and then the anticipatory piece, how we can head off some of these things or start these things early before we get into bad situations. So we'll talk about those three for the rest. The way we have been working so far is we've prioritized from top to bottom as it's being presented right now, really first focusing on, can we identify an adverse event? If we can see that event and we can turn on our control system, I think we're 80% of the way of where we have claimed we would try and get to for our control system. All right, those are things around here. And what do we mean by adverse event is conditions that we're considering bad. We've looked for some specific definitions that we can use for adverse event, just to kind of pass the buck on to somebody else who's saying, hey, we're going to use this third party's definition, but we haven't found anything super robust there. The best that we've found, in my opinion so far, is using the EPA's definition of air pollution episode, which is when air quality reaches levels that may be harmful to human health or environment. And from their reports, what they often seem to use is a changing of AQI levels, that they use those as real, of course. So air quality index levels. That is a very, somebody say something, sorry?
Oh, I think you said you couldn't see raised hands. I have a question about this, but I want you to be able to finish your thought. I'm sorry.
Yeah. No, go for it. Go for it.
Well, I think I was surprised that they don't have a clear definition, since they do have like quantitative regulatory standard values. Can you say a little more on what you said, like why they don't, or like why they don't have a great definition?
So they have definitions of like, yes, we could use the air quality standards and like the target thresholds or the AQIs or things like that. But what we haven't found, or let me phrase it slightly differently, the EPA seems to have kind of shifted to more of a model of looking at air pollution on a continuum, which I think has a lot of positives to it. And we could choose any one of their lines, but we haven't found something that was really clear beyond their health guidelines of saying above this is good, below this is bad. Now we could
Okay.
use those thresholds, those health thresholds that you're talking about. Our concerns is they didn't really scale very well across the country from a standpoint of if you're already always in a bad air quality environment, you would either always be defined as always in an adverse event, or you would never be in an adverse event. Does that make sense? We were trying to look for something that would be ticking back and forth across the line.
Yeah, no, I see what you're saying. I appreciate you going into it though, because that didn't immediately occur to me, but I see what you're saying. It's either in or out of an event, and it not maybe consistent with the way like air pollution episodes might occur or rise.
Yeah, I think it's the episodic piece that we haven't been able to find a good definition for, that we could just like latch on to. You know, we were hoping we would find something that says like, well, the EPA considers an adverse event for 4 columns if it's twice the baseline or something like that. And we haven't found something like that. Does that help clarify?
Absolutely, yeah, I really appreciate it. Thank you, Christian.
Yeah, no problem. We thought this would be a really simple thing and spent a surprising amount of time going down rabbit holes to try and find some easy, broadly applicable line that we could use, which we haven't found. So one of the working systems that we've been using so far, and we'll talk about more of this in a little bit, is either crossing into and out of the next AQI level. We could consider like an adverse event or some multiplier of what your baseline is. You know, if you've gone up by 20% over your baseline. Anyway, we'll talk more about that in a little bit. So our capturing of adverse events, where we're putting a lot of the effort up until this point, followed by how from a sensor standpoint, we can look for infiltrations. And what we mean by this is particles from outside getting into the home. Right now, we're focusing on outdoor particles as opposed to indoor sources. So this is something I want to talk to you about, Ellison, offline, and see what we might be able to leverage from your Epic Homes pieces, just because I think you have some really nice data sets where you know the indoor events a little better.
Yeah.
But what can we use as, from a programmatic coding sensor-based standpoint, to be quantifying that infiltration is occurring and have confidence that rises in indoor air pollution that we see we can attribute to outdoor sources. The reason that we're focusing on this, we're trying to like dive into this, is the pressurization system is likely most applicable for keeping outdoor pollutants out as opposed to doing filtration.
Christian, can I, yeah, so another possibility is that you could use the pressures to indicate when infiltration is occurring.
Yep.
Which might be more direct than trying to infer whether certain particles are attributable to outside. I don't know if you're thinking about that or if that's too circular for you, but it's just a thought.
No, I think it's a great one. And I think it's one I would love, it's certainly one I would love to incorporate in. I think where we're at with some of the pressure stuff is horse and cart, chicken and egg type piece. We need to start testing some of the different approaches and the data sets that we have available to us, the large data sets we have available to us at this point, are indoor and outdoor particle concentrations. But yes, I think pressurization is a great one for us to make sure that we leave that avenue open to incorporate as the data becomes available.
Yeah, and I think, well, so it would require measuring a pressure in the house of interest. Right, so it would be a data stream. But like if you were measuring pressure at the same time and the indoor was always was depressurized relative to the outdoor, then you would know that infiltration was occurring. That is not. So the building shell itself could be filtering out pollutants, and the pressures are not able to determine that. But it would determine whether you had the conditions that were right for flow.
Yes. Yep. I think you captured that perfectly. Do those conditions exist? And one of the things I'll show in an upcoming slide, I think that pressure piece will be a really nice sanity check. And I do think capturing indoor and outdoor pressure, if we can do that in a scalable and accurate way, would be a really nice validation component as we start to incorporate the hardware at larger scales. And then the last major piece that we're kind of been working on it, but it's the lowest on the priority list right now, is anticipating events early. Can we start the intervention before a problem occurs? I really view this from, it's, you know, some spectrum of, you know, two extreme bookends. One extreme bookend being you don't do anything until conditions are really bad, which I think we could argue is kind of the status quo right now. You know, people wait until conditions are really bad, until they can smell things inside their homes, and then they might do something, or they have just seen the news report saying, oh, you should turn on filtration in your home, because that's what the local health administration is saying. It's like one bookend, purely reactive on the extreme. The other extreme of the bookend is, you know, we magically know all, and we can start doing things before the event even occurs. And of course, we can't do that, but we need to figure out where between those two extremes can we first viably do it. So when can we anticipate an event? And probably more importantly, where is the trade-off point between we now have high enough confidence that an event is going to occur that it's worth me gambling my money by running my system, my wear and tear on my equipment, my noise, headaches, all of those things. And so I don't want to dismiss that this is an important topic, because I think it's really it's one of the things that could make this really novel from a long-term standpoint, but it's our lowest priority from the standpoint that the other two things have to be working for us to really do much with the anticipatory, be able to test our anticipatory control pieces. And then as an add-on, which is not a priority, but it's a low-hanging fruit for us, is addressing indoor sources. And this is purely from the standpoint of many of the algorithms and kind of control processes that we're building right now could be applied to an indoor only event. And so we're just keeping that in the back of our heads all the time, but it's like an add-on from a Sapphire's standpoint, because it's, you know, pennies on the dollar to scale that up. A little bit about the data sets that we've been using so far to get here. A very large fraction of the data we've been using has been coming from historical purple air data that we have mined over the last year or so. So we started with about 18,500 sets of sensor data. So these are like individual data streams from around the world. From that, we down selected to just under 5,000 that we could pair indoor outdoor sets. Now, we don't have tons of detail about what these indoor outdoor combinations are, but we know from a GPS standpoint and the self-reported location of the sensors that these are likely pretty good pair sets. About 500, 600 got kicked out from quality assurance concerns, mostly just quality with the data that we were seeing in there. Long periods of flat lines indicating the sensors weren't working. Some sensors that only ran for hours or days as opposed to the months of data that we really need to use this. So this was actually a larger data set remaining than I was anticipating. And then another 400-ish or so that we've kicked out because of concerns that we flagged from likely indoor sources that we didn't want to be muddying up our algorithms at this point. We don't know what the causes of these are, but these are households that consistently, or indoor outdoor sensor pairs, that consistently have high indoor concentrations with no outdoor sources. Now, there's way more indoor spikes than outdoor spikes, so it's always the case. Just because I think people are doing things in their home. Every time you cook, you get a little bit of a blip. The outdoor spikes might be larger, but we actually see tons more fluctuations often for the indoors than the outdoors. But there are some households that look like there's probably other things going on that we just had too many questions about and kicked them out. And we had such a large data set anyway that it became easier just to take out those ones that were really questionable. We've split it roughly 2/3, 1/3 for data that we've been using for training, and a third of the data is purely being saved only for testing the algorithms once we have a half-baked plan in place. There's whole schemes about how you like remix your training and testing data sets, make sure you don't have bias, all of those things. But that's a down the road problem. Right now, we're starting with the fully separated. Ellison, one of the places I would like to kind of talk to you at some point about is adding your households into this testing as essentially final validation or separate validation, whatever way you want to put it, just because we know of other things going on and are some of the things that we're putting in place to say, hey, this must be an indoor event. Can we actually capture the ones that you might know are indoor events from your other data streams? So,
yeah, I think, can I say, or do you mind if I follow up just real briefly?
Please do.
It seems like it would be helpful to sit down with you and say like more precisely what our data looks like. I think of our data in terms of household days of data, and maybe thinking of it if you want it all at once or if you want it sort of tiered, where like data that's the most well characterized and some data that's less well characterized. But yeah, it'd be nice to sit down and walk you through the structure of that data set, and then you can maybe with that knowledge tell us what you most want to use. But happy to do that anytime. I feel like we'd be ready to do that whenever.
Sounds great. Yeah. That sounds perfect. I think what I'd suggest we probably do based on where we're at from our development side of things, and from me wanting to make sure that Carson is involved in this, just because he's going to be dealing with a bunch of this data, is probably kick that down the road a month or so until Carson's back in town, just so that we're not to repeat to him. But I would love to do that.
Yeah, when I'm around and teaching in the fall, so whenever it makes sense on your work stream to do that, we'll be ready.
Fantastic. Sounds great. And then the other kind of big-ish data set that we've been using is we've taken a subset of these homes that we've been pairing, and we've matched them up with data files from the EPA AirNow network that have been pulled out because they were communities that we knew forest fire events were going on. And so these are areas where we feel that it's a high probability that they should have a higher than average number of adverse air quality events going on. And we're using this as a bit of a sanity check. Can we pick out similar windows, or do we have overlapping with some of the AirNow adverse windows? It's like, oh, we saw, this 2-month period, we saw a lot more events. Does that actually correspond to a third-party data set showing that there were air quality? It's not perfect, but just a bit of a sanity check. Okay, next one here, super wordy slide, and then there'll be a completely no word slide next week. So the initial algorithms we ran, we were using purely transitions across air quality indexes 4 times that air quality outdoors was in the 90th highest percentile of the average for that year. So we go through and look at a bunch of historical air data, say this is kind of the distribution of typical air data. And if it was in the worst cases, we would say, okay, that was an adverse event. It did pretty darn well capturing events. We could tell, not overly surprisingly, if we're looking at real time, this is all looking at historical data, but looking at time series air quality event data or air concentration data, really easy to flag, hey, this is higher than we would expect, or we were clicking into a different AQI back. So fantastic, we captured events. We also had a terrible false positive to true positive ratio. So what I mean by this is looking at infiltration. We could capture tons of outdoor events, but many of the outdoor events did not match up with any indication that indoor conditions change. There's a lot of reasons for that. The biggest one being many of these events are fairly short. So we didn't have any sort of time period for it. We would see a plume go across a house, for example, for a 10-minute period. Of course, it got really high, but between the lag associated with particles infiltrating into the home, we saw no rise. The other thing that I think is causing some of these pieces, and my household is likely key, like a prime example of this, is that there's source emissions outside that are very episodic, that are reasonably close to their air quality monitor, but don't change the bulk air quality around their homes. So for us, for example, we have our purple air monitor in our backyard because it's the most secure. Our backyard is also where our grill and our smoker are. So we can see events when we're cooking in the backyard that don't change really the overall concentration around the house. So it was great. We were capturing these events. Probably would be protective, but also be very wasteful and probably annoying to homeowners from the standpoint of always be turning on and off. So we're working on two alternative approaches right now, both of which we're judging based on the intervention being successful when an indoor event would have occurred. The first is accounting for how long adverse air quality events occur, what the duration of them is. So essentially we identify that a raised air pollution event has occurred. We wait a period of time to determine this isn't just a fluke, and then we intervene after so much time. And we're still figuring out what that time duration needs to be. But essentially we wait. The downside, or it looks promising, but I think one of the things that we really need to make this better is some other pieces to help guide us to know what that lag time should be. Pressure, as Tammy referred to, would really help, but it's not a data set we have right now. So we are diving into things such as temperature, which we're using as kind of a proxy in some ways. Maybe we'd have these differentials. If it's really cold outside, we'd be having these different pieces, or it's really warm, maybe their windows are open. So weather and wind to help guide these. Early work there is looking promising, but it's just a slog getting this data. Just really annoying getting enough of a matched data set so far to do this in a robust standpoint. The other approach that we're using that's looking a lot more promising just from a feasibility standpoint is looking for the start of a rising indoor edge. So this is imperfect from a protecting of health standpoint, but probably really successful for an intervention should occur. So what we're doing is we see an outdoor event occurring. We then start to look at indoor air quality at a higher time resolution, and we look for conditions start to get bad. And if we start to see a trend inside, we then start doing our intervention. Takeaway, code is working. We could deploy something right now, turn on and off things in people's homes. It just probably would provide more false positives than we are comfortable or happy with. That was a lot of things, so I'm going to go through each of these real quick just from a graphical standpoint.
Allison's got a
Make sure
hand
we're
up.
all on the same page. Sorry, did somebody say something?
Allison's got a hand up.
Oh, yeah.
A question I had about the false positive rate. I'm wondering if in this scenario, is that how much of a penalty there is? Is the major penalty just that the intervention would go on more than it should and potentially increase the utility cost for running it? I'm thinking about this more conceptually, not like, I understand if you want to get it to perform better, but sometimes false positives, the consequences are high. This seems like a case where the consequences might be low, but I wanted to ask your perspective on that.
Yeah, I think you are correct. It's utility cost, it's maintenance cost, it's annoyance cost to households because they're hearing their fan blow, all of those things. But you are also correct, it's all a priorities thing, maybe. You could make the case that I care about my health way more than I care about my money. So I'm going to run my house like a clean room situation and always pressurize it.
Yeah. I just wanted to know if like, thinking about it that way made sense to you since you've thought about it a lot more, but not no cost to positives, but maybe like trade-off or.
Yeah, so I think the trade-off is those monetary, however we want to monetize things, annoyance, cost, whatever. That's one piece of consideration. And the second one being, trying to drive this work towards a publication for Carson and the team. That's a really boring publication of like, oh, our algorithm says we should just always have the fan on.
No, I get like that. That's not
there's a practicality piece there too.
Yeah, that's not a great result. Okay, yeah, thanks.
Any other questions before we move to the not so pretty pictures?
Yeah, I've got a question, which is if one of the major reasons for a false positive is something like what you were just talking about of your smoker grill in the backyard, would making use of both kind of an on-site and a couple of other nearby monitors help with that? If you had access to that, I know that purple air is making it more difficult, but if we had something like that, so we could say something about, does it look like things are just generally rising, or is it really localized to that house?
Yep, great idea, and one that we started to play with. We've built into our code. So the purple air network is like fantastic from the like number and how dispersed they are, all those, but you are correct, they're making it increasingly annoying, and it sounds like maybe in the future expensive to access that data. So we've written into the codes for the things that we're running outside, pulling from the federal monitors, which are not as good because the spatial resolution isn't great, but it's a step in the direction of what you are talking about. So yeah, I think ideally you look at the 4 houses nearest them. Oh, they're all rising. This is a real event, but a difficult one potentially for our pilot run, like our deployments, to be able to rely on that. But yeah, 100%. I think that's a good one. I was going to talk about this towards the end, but one of the things that we didn't end up including in the reworked Sapphire's proposal, and like from like the original plan versus the resubmissions and things like that, is some of like the multi-node looking at pollution coming across town. So I've started putting together some concept pages that I'm hope to put together into a proposal that'll get people from this group's interest level in and opinions on in the coming months here to do exactly, can we monitor rolling pollution to say a plume is about to hit us, which is kind of what you're talking about. Okay, some pretty pictures here just to be cognizant of time, just to make sure that all these concepts are clear for everybody. False positive, so outdoor on top, indoor on the bottom. We see a rise on the outside, not on the inside. We're calling that a false positive. Or a true positive, we see an outside rise and an inside rise that we feel reasonably confident we can peg together, that these two are somehow related together. Move my little box here. So the first of the pieces that we're using to try and improve our false positive to true positive is what we're calling a hold off time. where we make sure air pollution outside goes up for a certain amount of time. For most households, this seems to be in a 5 to 20 minute time period, which is, I guess, longer than I initially thought would be necessary. But when we're talking about long-term pieces, probably is not a crazy amount of time, but holding off, making sure outdoor conditions are a sustained negative condition before we intervene. So that's one of the approaches we're working on improving right now. The second is the rising edge. We see outside going up, so we start looking at inside more, and we have a higher fidelity model trying to capture the rising edge of indoor conditions and turning things on. And the last piece that we're still kind of dancing around how to do on a really like scalable piece is how we deal with signal to noise, specifically on indoors. What is a fluctuation of just natural things and what is an actual rising edge in terms of decreasing air quality? Lots of robust models that we can use there, just kind of choosing which one we want to do. And to be honest, will probably vary household to household, but there's also ways to do that. These are about the easiest of learning algorithms to say that this is a natural noise for this home. This is a natural noise. Okay, that's what I have. Let me go back to questions. I'm outside. Sorry if it's brick. So some kind of recaps real quick. We have a functional piece, right? So we have a code we can click on. When we see outdoor events go on, we lights are turning on. That's happening on the powerhouse roof right now. We're not doing any intervention, but we're turning things on and off. This was supposed to be tied into a coal hopper, but they won't put my roof on because it keeps raining too much. We'll connect it into Paul's house of pressure once that's ready, so we're all geared up there. But we have something that captures events well. It just captures too many events. So we're working on driving it to more sustainable, happier, more livable for people, as opposed to just burning them out of always running this thing all the time.
So Christian, I think what, I don't remember if it's in the proposal, but something we had talked about was setting up some kind of utility function or cost benefit function. And that's probably a ways down the road, but it seems like it'd be a way to deal with this, because you're really kind of doing a cost benefit calculation in your head right now, right? Like, oh, I don't want it to run that much. That's too much of a cost. So yeah, so I'm just curious, how hard is it to make that explicit? Is it worth like having a group discussion where we talk about what we perceive as the costs and the benefits and how they could be quantified, or whether it's challenging to quantify them, because as you said, some of them will have uncertainties greater than others. Yeah. So
what we've done so far, the way we're evaluating the revised algorithms is we're essentially sweeping from no hold off time and or very minimal indoor rise to really large hold off time and really large rising edge, which essentially shifts our false positive to true positive ratios, which is what I think will tie into the cost benefit. Like once we have a better idea of how those factors drive towards false positive, true positive ratios, we can then put values on them. So the code actually has that right now. So we have placeholders for dollar and for annoyance factor, which we just have like from a 1 to 10 scale. And to the question you asked, yes, I think we're ready to broaden the conversation there. What we're not doing right now is letting those drive they are calculated variables in the model as opposed to driving variables, but we'll just switch which is a forcing and which is a resulting parameter. So we've got more or less placeholders in for them. right now we can process the whatever 1,000 households in like 2 hours. So each of our parameter variations is about 2 hours. So it's actually not too bad. Over a week, we can kind of map all of the space. We can make that much faster. I just haven't talked to Carson yet about like making his code efficient yet. But yeah, 100%. I think we are very close to being able to have those be controllable knobs. What I would like to get to this late summer, early fall is on the system we have out on the rooftop, switch those to driving factors and really do see if our ratios change.
Yeah.
So right now we're just counting more or less the relay went off
Yeah.
and then determining should it have gone off. What we don't have right now for our indoor, or sorry, for the rooftop test is tying it to an indoor event. So
Right.
all we're really able to capture right now upstairs is what did a condition exist that would have likely led to. We just have a artificial penetration factor for a made up building typed into our code right now.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
we're
what-
close. If I knew it had all been like more the technical people, I would have put equations up today, but I thought this was going to be like general audience. I want to talk about concepts instead of talking
They'll be
equations, but
watching the video, so it's good.
Yeah.
I think it's good. Well, I guess another question is if there's, we talked about the importance of determining time constants. If there's anything else that could help you evaluate your what you're seeing as costs and benefits, then I'm still struggling with some of the aspects of our data analysis, obviously, but if we can start thinking about just what's important to you, we might come up with ways to bring it out of the data, like even on a real-time basis.
the one that comes to mind immediately from the pressure curves you've sent so far is it does seem like there's a very strong diurnal element to what you have going on, which is fantastic. But diving into a little bit more about like how much penetration or infiltration do we think is going to be occurring on the shorter time scales, like the 5 to 10 minute? Like, are we going to be pushing air pollution in and out of the home?
Or will it not get there in the first place?
Yeah.
That's a big question I have, and it'll be different for particles than for gases. So we're not even to tracer gases yet, and when we do tracer gases, they will not answer your question. But I think that's a huge question I have. Like, I am curious whether, for example, it is worth it to try to predict infiltration due to wind because those fluctuations may be too short to drive it. And if that turns out to be true, yay, right? And so I think that's going to be one of the big challenges is we do not know penetration factors through the shell or how long it takes air to move through the shell, right? There's some time dependence to not just involved with the volume of air, but involved with traveling through the shell. And I think that's one of our unknowns. So I don't have an answer for you there, but I think we both have a similar question.
So I know we're a little over time, but a couple things. One is maybe not directly answering some of these questions like particles through the main shell, but I actually do have some data that could speak to that from work that we've done on garage contaminant transport. So if you think of the wall between the house and the attached garage as part of the shell, we see that kind of lag. It's really very interesting. And I can show some data from that. I do have some data of, from when I was trying to depressurize and pressurize a room in our Illinois house when there was a massive wind event. So I could show some of that and how long that lasts. I also want to say, while I've grabbed the floor, that the house of pressure has doors and windows now, which means we actually have an ability to have an enclosed volume, which means that we are very close, I think, in that aspect to being able to do some of the things in terms of connecting your control to my system. Christian, Mason and I are going to take a look at data from the dust tracks that from the tests we've been doing sometime next week. But to see what other tests we might want to do just within what we're already doing. But we're going to be able to start doing things of like generate particles and have them go inside without a filter. You're going to be able to see that's not going through the envelope, but you're going to see a rise and be able to do some control things there. So I think we're close to being able to start at least some initial things on that side.
That's great to hear.
Cool.
Anyway, if you want me to present some of that other stuff I was talking about in a future meeting, let me know.
Yeah, I mean, sure. Just propose it. Just put your name on the schedule. So it's really exciting to see how far you are, Christian. It's just you've done an awful lot of work on a lot of different pieces.
Now we just gotta get them to converge. That's the fear point right now. We have a bunch of arms all going in hopefully general directions that we'll have to pull together to like get to deployable technology. We're close, but
It's really cool.
few key things that need to mesh the puzzle pieces to not mess up somebody's home. So
Yeah, and I think, yeah, so if we can think of ways to not mess up somebody's home and explore them, then I would advocate for that. I realize, so Epic Homes is going to be just measurements and no interventions. But there are, yeah, I'm open to going off the program if it's really needed to explore some things.
I think a piece that I don't think was explicitly in our plan originally, but I think will be worthwhile, is purely having the sensing components before we turn on prevention pieces. Having the indoor and outdoor, let them run for a while in some homes, even if they're not our final homes.
Yeah.
And I think we sort of talked about doing that in the proposal, but I don't think it was a deliberate task. And I think we'll want to increase that. Now, the upside is it doesn't necessarily need to be our intervention homes, right? I'll put one in my house, right? It's a little bit different, but we'll be able to see it if I'm capturing events and all of that before intervening in any way.
Yeah, so maybe some more or similar observations when we can observe more about the system. Yeah. Okay.
To get to the full point of like saying, hey, we would have turned on the
Right.
fan here.
Right.
We're
yeah.
just not connecting the fan on
Yeah.
day one. That's what I think.
Okay. And then the other thing that I noted from this meeting is you had this question about you need to get back to the social team about the kind of inputs that people might want. It seems like we should schedule a meeting just around that to talk that whole thing out when everybody's available. Because we keep alluding to it and we keep saying, yeah, we got to figure that out. And it seems like we should settle on some options.
Yeah, I think after the last meeting where I presented the physical mock-ups, it'd be good to circle back to them, but it sounded like some of the social folks were going to like talk offline about like now that they knew what might be possible, what they wanted. But yeah, I don't want to. You are correct. Having that conversation explicitly is good.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Great. Thank you. Thank you for your presentation. And have a great weekend, everyone.
Everyone.
Yeah, thanks, Christian. It was great.